Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee, Art, Design, and Architecture. This show is coming to you from Florida on a gorgeous Sunday morning overlooking the gentle lapping waves on the Gulf of Mexico. My motivation for this podcast channel is to broadcast good news stories, interesting people, and food for thought. So pour yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, take a deep breath, get cozy, and enjoy a break for some uplifting conversations. And today's book is Managing the Climate Crisis, Designing and Building for Floods, Heat, Drought, and Wildfire by Jonathan Barnett and Matthijs Bouw, published by Island Press in 2022. Jonathan is a fellow at the Penn Institute for Urban Research and a professor emeritus of city and regional planning, and a former director of the Urban Design Program at the University of Pennsylvania. Matthijs is a professor of practice in architecture and landscape architecture and the McHarg Center Fellow for Risk and Resilience at the University of Pennsylvania. And he is a founder of One Architecture and Urbanism, established in 1995. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning, Tricia.
Well, I don't know what you're having this morning, but I'm having a cup of hot tea with a spot of honey. What's in your cup?
I'm afraid it's just a glass of water.
It's tea in my case as well. No honey.
No honey, huh?
No honey.
Just straight.
Straight up.
Well, let's begin with, I gave a little introduction about you, but let's hear from you. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and your educational background? And we'll start with Jonathan.
Well, I was educated as an architect. I went to the Yale School of Architecture. I'm also a graduate of the University of Cambridge in England. And I'd always wanted to be an architect from a young age. But when I started working in architectural offices, I discovered that what I had imagined architects did was nothing like what the reality of it was. Architects don't get to make the big decisions about buildings. They don't decide where it's located, how big it is, what it's used for. And I thought that was all part of architecture. And by various combinations of good luck and so forth, I started working on a political campaign and then ended up working in the city of New York and became the director of urban design there. And I've become one of the people who have invented it's a profession that's existed for many years, but urban design as it's practiced today is something that people in my generation sort of helped formulate. So that's what I've been doing. I've been writing about it, practicing and teaching urban design. The connection to climate change is that what's happening to the climate and the weather effects of it are going to completely upend a lot of assumptions that people have been making about how cities and towns and suburbs should grow. These big decisions include where you're going to be able to build and what you're going to build and how it's going to be done. Drew me towards trying to figure out what it is that we have to do to change the way building takes place in order to make it work in this time when the climate is changing completely.
Oh, very interesting. Matthijs?
I'm after doing my high school in the United States, I moved back to the Netherlands, where I'm from, and studied architecture at the TU Delft. And like Jonathan, I discovered that architecture is not everything, and that I was really interested more in complex urban problems than in problems of architecture per se. So I founded, after the TU Delft practice called One Architecture and Urbanism in Amsterdam, and that practice worked not only on architecture but also on all kinds of urban problems to the national scale. We did much of the sort of national planning in the Netherlands. And one of the things that brought me to the United States was in 2012. Superstorm Sandy happened. I was watching that from an Amsterdam bar with a Danish architect friend of mine called Bjarke Ingels, and we were looking at it and we were sort of shocked by what we saw, how America was very sort of unprepared for climate change, but also how response to it showed the sort of atomization in the United States, and the fact that everyone sort of went at it from themselves, and that there was, for instance, not like governments taking care of these things, which was what we as Europeans were used to. So Bjarke and I said, well, maybe we should see if we can do some work there, and because we think that design has a role. Design is not only good in creating practical solutions with multiple solutions, but design is also a way to sort of tell a story about what you can do together as a community. And so shortly after the opportunity arose, Bjarke and I formed a team and participated in a competition called Rebuild by Design for the concept or a vision for the protection of Lower Manhattan. We won that competition, and that brought me to the United States. I set up a practice here in addition to my Dutch practice. In the competition, I met some fantastic people, amongst other Marilyn Taylor, who was then the dean at Penn. She said, "We would love to have you come visit us," and that's how I became a colleague of Jonathan, and I've been here ever since.
Oh, well, that's fascinating. My master's degree is in landscape architecture. And yeah, I was more interested in design problems and how our cities and towns. After visiting Europe many years ago and then come back here, I could see that our urban design just didn't feel like a city. And that also led me to going into landscape architecture. Let me ask you, what was your motivation for teaming up together to write this particular book?
Well, let me answer that one because I think I initiated it. I was at a conference at the University of Pennsylvania that Matthijs was moderating, and I was listening to him, and I said, "This is a very unusual person. He actually understands what urban design is all about." I have to tell you that it's easy to say you're an urban designer, and many people go around saying and doing it. Not everybody understands that it doesn't mean a lot to design if you can't implement it. And I said, if this person would be willing to work with me, I would like to work with him to do a book about climate. So I proposed it to him.
I no, I said yes. Having a practice, it's fantastic to have a co-writer, to have a sparring partner. Writing books on your own, if you have a lot of other things to do, it's really difficult. To have someone stimulate you is great. But I also really appreciate Jonathan's writing, and I think it fits very well with the plan that we developed together. Jonathan is someone who has an incredible clarity and simplicity in his writing style. And I found, and Jonathan agreed, that it would be really great to just write a book that was broadly accessible about the climate crisis and what you can do about it in, let's say, the built environment or in land use. There's a lot of fantastic books on the climate crisis. Some are highly specialized, some are highly innovative, but sometimes they felt a bit like they talk to the niche group that I'm part of. And I thought it would be fantastic to just write a book that appeals to a much broader audience, that city planners everywhere could just sort of pick up and get the basics. That would be a 101 for students who would be interested in this topic. And Jonathan is absolutely the right partner to do that with.
I'll tell the audience on your cover photo, you've got just ordinary people and they're just walking from concrete block to concrete block out into the water.
Well, the graphic designer cropped that photo a little bit. The people are not actually. It's a bridge in the Netherlands that connects an island in the middle of a river that was broadened to manage the higher volumes of water that are coming because of the change in the climate. And in the picture, they're actually going to the next block, and they can cross over. It's an experience, but it's not meant to be a challenge in that same way. But the graphic designer decided that he would show the last person about to fall in the water, which is just the way he was cropped. And we said, okay.
I think it's kind of a good example if we kind of feel like we're about to step off into something and we're not sure what we're going to do.
Well, we did see the cover as a kind of a metaphor for the situation. The graphic designer put a twist on it.
I think it's kind of cool. I kind of think it kind of says it all. I do. I like your book. It's very simple writing. It's very easy to understand and really nice diagrams in here. Tell me, what is the problem? What is climate crisis, and how is it, different from a regular weather pattern, et cetera? Because for lay people too, and even me, I'd like to understand more what it really is and what's going on.
Well, let me start off by answering that there are actually two problems. One is the changing climate and what needs to be done to slow it down and eventually prevent it from changing any more than it's already begun to change. And that's the one that everybody is focused on. And when you talk to people about it, they all agree it's a problem, or most people agree it's a problem, but they say it depends on solving it depends on international agreements, and we have to get India and China and Russia and everybody else to agree. And in the meantime, I'm just not going to think about it. And we know this is the big problem. And we tell people that in the book that you can't take your eye off the fact that it's a worldwide crisis and we have to stop it. And the crisis is caused by combustion of fossil fuels, adding gases to the atmosphere. And the atmosphere acts as a kind of reflective layer. It's like a greenhouse. And if we didn't have a greenhouse atmosphere, we couldn't live on the Earth. It would be like the moon. But when the greenhouse gets more powerful and holds more of the heat from the sun in, the climate gets warmer. So that's the big problem. But the other problem, which people have sort of taken their eye off, is we have to live with these changes now. And that's what our book is about. It is, okay, the climate is changing. We need international agreements and a huge effort worldwide to solve it. But in the meantime, we're having wildfires, which are worse every year. We're having coastal flooding. We're having drought. We're having heat. We need to figure out how we manage that while the big problem is being solved. So our book is about how do you live with climate change safely while the world figures out what to do about it.
Matisse, what would you like to add?
Yeah, and I think it's that focus on that second problem, right? How so in specialized language, we say that the first problem is about climate mitigation. It's about making sure that we stop emitting greenhouse gases. And the second problem is called climate adaptation. And this book focuses on climate adaptation. And as a practicing architect and planner and urban designer, one of the things that I realize is that adapting, which is often something that happens locally, right, in a city or in a region, is just very difficult because it means you need to change the ways you're doing things. You need to change the way you're building maybe your roads, or the way you do land use, or the way you let nature do its work. And so this book is really arguing that we have most of the solutions for adaptation. And if we start adapting now, we should have started earlier, but if we start adapting now and make it parts of the routines with which we build or rebuild or transform our environment, we're going to go a long way in reducing the worst effects of this climate crisis. And so what we're trying to do is lay out in a number of chapters, each focusing on specific hazards like coastal flooding, like heat, like drought, of how you can do that, and how that fits, basically how that relates to the world with which we plan our environment. And what we try to do is to make a case for start doing it now, bringing it into your daily practices of how you shape your environment. Because if you do that, we're going to be much better off. And if we don't do that, we're going to have a huge, huge, huge problem later on.
And of course, we're not the only people thinking about this. So we've made a real effort in this book to round up the work of other people and other governments which are trying to put answers together for adaptation and put them all together in the book so that people know what's already being accomplished and where what they can do will fit in.
Yes, and I like how, again, the book is really written with very scientific background in a very easy to understand way. That's what I found. It's really enjoyable in a sense to be able to read and comprehend these big concepts and issues of what's happening. And I'd like to ask you next, because you take us step by step through the book. What are the climate threats? Maybe you can each take one or two. We got flooding, heavy rains, heat waves, drought, and importantly, I thought freshwater shortages, food shortages, and wildfires. What are we looking at here?
Shall I start, Jonathan? Talk a bit about flooding.
Yes, I think,
So
Matthijs,
when we talk,
you start.
yeah, when we talk about flooding, we've divided the flooding as one of the most dominant and recognizable climate hazards into three chapters, and that has to do with the fact how we approach these things scientifically. The first chapter focuses on coastal flooding, and coastal flooding is basically caused by often a combination of two elements. One is sea level rise. Our seas are rising. That could be up to maybe 6 feet in towards the end of the century. We don't know exactly what with what pace the seas will rise because there's a lot of uncertainty with the climate crisis. But sea level rise is one component of coastal flooding. And what that results in is in so-called tidal flooding, which means that low-lying areas that are now dry during, let's say, a regular king's tide or something like that, will start flooding over time. And the second component of coastal flooding is storm surge flooding. That can have to do with extreme weather events like a hurricane, or northeaster that sort of blows waters on shore to higher flood levels. And as you can imagine, the combination of the two creates even higher flood levels because if a hurricane now would cause, let's say, a superstorm like Sandy, cost about 14 feet of flooding above normal. If you add 6 feet of sea level rise to that, you would talk about a total of about 20 feet. So that's the first flooding type. That's coastal flooding. Then the second flooding type is called riverine flooding. That is, as we know, as the word says, the flooding through rivers and creeks. And then we can imagine not only, let's say, the Mississippi floods or the floods in the sort of big rivers that we've all seen. I think a number of years ago, we saw the flood levels in the Mississippi rise to a very dangerous level, but also floods in creeks and smaller tributaries where often you see flash floods happening. The water, if it rains a lot, all flows through these creeks, and those could rise and create flooding in what is called the floodplain. And then there's a third type of flooding that we talk about, which is pluvial flooding. That is flooding from rainstorms that basically can inundate city streets, that can inundate tunnels or infrastructure that can inundate in New York. You've seen that with Ida, the subway system. So that's the flooding that comes from very large rainstorms. And those rainstorms are also increasing because the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere increase the temperature of the atmosphere. The atmosphere can hold more water at one time, and that water can come down at one time. And then you have what you call pluvial flooding, mostly and often also combined with riverine flooding. The reason we've divided those into two chapters is that the adaptation measures between riverine flooding and pluvial flooding are often quite different. Jonathan, do you want to continue talking about.
Well, let's start with heat. Tricia, what's the temperature outside your house right now?
I don't know. It's morning, but it's going to get up into the 90s at least.
And I'm sitting in Center City, Philadelphia, and it's often hot in the summer here, but this has been a continuous heat wave all across the country. People are noticing that the number of days which are up in the 90s or even the hundreds is getting more frequent, and these heat waves are lasting longer. And that can be expected to continue. We really haven't seen anything about like what it's going to be like in 10 years yet. And so one of the things that we've tried to do in our book is say, okay, this is one of the most dangerous effects of climate change. And unlike flooding, which maybe only affects, say, 10% of the places where people live in the country, heat is pretty much going to affect everybody. One thing that nobody, except a very small number of governments, is doing is trying to protect renters and people who apartments and houses from it being too hot inside. In the wintertime, almost every community has a law which says you can't let the temperature in your building go below X number. It's just too dangerous. A very simple thing that Montgomery County is doing in Maryland, very few other places are doing, is you say, okay, you're the landlord, you can't let the temperature inside your building go up above 80. It's instead of having a minimum heat requirement, you have a maximum heat requirement. That's something any community could do. Yes, it increases the demand for air conditioning, and I'll come back to that in a second because I think that's an important issue. But another thing that can be done is people who live in hotter climates than ours have known about this for years. Don't go out when it's too hot. So stay out of the midday sun, which means maybe you should change the hours that people work. And that's particularly true of people who have to work outdoors. You can pass a local law that protects people from having to work in the fields or on construction at the times of the day when the weather is most dangerous.
Yes. I was living in the Florida Keys, and it's so intense and hot that yeah, you really can't be outside. Or they used to design, but I remember in Key West, did a little architecture tour. They used to design houses so that they would be at least cooler.
That's true. And that's another thing that we address, that people have forgotten that you can build buildings so that the natural ventilation is better. And at night, cool air can come into the house. Houses used to have exhaust fans. So if the weather does get colder at night, which it does usually, you can exhaust the hot air from your house and bring in cooler air. People used to have awnings to protect the windows. You can have external shades on buildings again. Uh, these are all things that people have sort of forgotten because they didn't need it because of air conditioning. One thing we spend some time on in the book is what's called geothermal cooling. That is, the earth below your house or building is at a constant temperature, which is higher than freezing and lower than the atmospheric temperature. And if you can have a cooling system where it's hard to explain this without a diagram, but basically you have water circulating down into the ground in a pipe system. It comes back into your building, a fan blows it across the pipes, and it cools the air. And it doesn't make it quite as cool as you'd really want it, but it takes an awfully large burden off the electric grid because you need much less cooling if you use geothermal. It costs more to install it, but over time it pays for itself in lower electric bills. So this is an option that's been neglected and something you could add to building codes for new buildings. So you can change building design to make them better ventilated, more shaded, and using a cooling system that takes less electricity. And then there are some larger urban design issues. You can plant trees if you can figure out how to keep them alive, which is a complicated issue, which we talk about. And you can actually go so far as to figure out ways to keep an entire city ventilated. We show an example from Stuttgart in Germany where they have worked on that. And at night, cool air blows through the city, cools out the pollution and lowers the temperature ready for the next day. And we've tried to look at those kinds of things that people can actually deal with without waiting for India and China to agree to a global system. Water shortages. Uh, People used to have rain barrels, particularly in the country. And the water that collects on your roof, instead of running off into the city's or town's stormwater system, can stay in a cistern, and you can use it to wash your car or water your garden. And uh, it's complicated to try to use it in your house because it's not as, for one reason or another, the water that flows off your roof isn't necessarily drinkable. But it's a simple solution, and it would help solve one of the flooding problems that Matthijs was just talking about, which is flash flooding. That is, if you have water retention on every house and building, less water flows into the streams and into the water systems, and you can capture, you can reduce flash flooding, and you can actually reduce river flooding by intercepting some of the water upstream. So we've tried to focus on these kinds of things that people can do, local governments can enact. You can make changes in the way the water is built to encourage people to have, they do that here in Philadelphia, to encourage people to have a rain barrel, and for larger institutions like universities to build what are called rain gardens, so that the water collects and flows into the aquifer instead of into the stormwater system. We've tried to emphasize things that you can do. And when it's a big ticket item, like some of the ones that Matthijs was talking about, where you have to build coastal protections, we talk about how you can get benefit from that. Matthijs, maybe you should talk a little bit about how your East River Park provides a benefit as well as protection.
Yeah, I think that's one of the underlying arguments that we try to make, right? If you design these elements well, they can provide multiple benefits in the same way that the rain barrel helps you with both drought and flash flooding. You can also see how a coastal protection system in a city like New York, and we're designing the coastal protection systems around Manhattan, can improve the waterfront. They can become parks, and with that, they can help cool people and have recreational benefits. They can also be designed such that it makes it easier for people to meet and get to know each other. That's one of the elements of urban design. You want to create social spaces. And the reason you also want to create social spaces in relation to the climate crisis is because we all know from research that neighborhoods where people know each other are actually better able to cope with disasters and to recover from disasters quickly. We've seen that Eric Kleinenberg has written the book Heat Wave in Chicago, about the Chicago heat wave, in which he showed how social cohesion helps reduce mortality from heat waves. We've seen that in the wake of all kinds of storms, that neighbors helping neighbors really is very, very important. So when you design infrastructure and when you create these type of solutions, you should always look at the possibilities to layer on top of each other benefits. And there's a second argument that we try to make, and I think that's related to it. We've learned that when you use natural systems to do that, plant trees, create space for water to naturally flow, use wetlands or soft shores, actually those solutions are often cheaper and have more benefits, but are also more flexible and adaptable in the face of uncertainty than the more fixed, concrete types of solutions. And we know that there are places where we're going to have these highly engineered, highly constructed measures to address the climate crisis. But we've also learned that when you can use nature, you should really try and do that. And that brings challenges because we've sort of lost our understanding of how to work with nature or build with nature. But that's, understanding, and that practice is now rapidly gaining ground, and nature-based solutions are becoming more and more accepting.
I would add, though, that nature is not an inexhaustible resource. And while rain barrels are all very well for managing drought, household uses and buildings in general only use about 10% of the water that gets used. And the big uses of water are agriculture and industry. And in agriculture, the majority of irrigation, even in places out west which are very short of water, is called flood irrigation. Essentially, they just dump water on the crops. And a very large amount of that evaporates or doesn't get to the roots. And it's a very wasteful system. Or there's what's called spray irrigation, which is like you can see that when you fly across irrigated farms, you see the circles that these spray irrigation machines make. And about 35% of that water is wasted. And there's a much less wasteful irrigation system, which is to have pipes, small pipes running along next to the crops, which have holes punched in them. Some people have this kind of irrigation in their own gardens. And it does cost more to put that in, but it uses a great deal less water. And if water is priced correctly, you save enough money to pay for it. And a lot of industrial users take water out of streams and then use it to cool their machinery and then dump it back into the stream again. That doesn't have to happen. The water can be circulated within the facility and cooled on the site of the industry. If you could get all industry to recirculate water used for cooling, and if you could get all farmers to use the most effective forms of irrigation, you go a long way towards solving the drought crisis as it is right now. It doesn't make any more rainfall, but it makes the water that we have much more usable.
Yes, that's true. Our architecture professor at my school had designed a house so that it collected. Now, this is in Miami. They do have monsoon rain. Collected the water off the roof into a large cistern, used all of it in a house, recirculated it also as gray water, and then sent it out. He didn't use any water at all, except maybe a little bit in the winter. That was, the non-drought time.
And if you could scale that up, there are problems. People are afraid of what you call gray water, that people will, to save money on their water bill, will start using water that isn't safe. But it is possible to design a system so that people don't do that. And let's talk about wildfire, which is another huge issue right now, even though it only affects some portions of the country at the present time. There's actually money, if this bill that's before Congress right now is signed by the president, which is beginning to look like it may, there's money immediately for some of the things that Matthijs and I are talking about, including reducing the amount of flammable material that's choking forests across the country. What happened is we've been so focused on preventing and stopping forest fires whenever they happen that we've not let the natural process of wildfire go to a conclusion. And as a consequence of suppressing fire, there's been like a century of buildup of what people call the understory in wildland, which is bushes and shrubs and dead trees. And they are very flammable. And in a drought period, and when there's more insect infestations, which is what's happening in wildland now, the forests become tinderboxes. And anything can set off a forest fire, including lightning strike, as well as careless campers. But the fires are worse now because of this. There's money in the infrastructure bill that's already passed, and there may be, which is, you have to distinguish with federal money with what's authorized by Congress and then what's actually appropriated by Congress. And in the latest bill, I don't know whether it's just authorized or whether it's actually appropriated, there is money for thinning forests and for doing what are called prescribed burns, which is a somewhat scary process where you actually set the fire to get rid of the understory, but you keep it under control. And in that kind of a fire, the trees don't burn, just the understory. And when a lightning strike hits and a forest burns, It doesn't burn at as high a temperature. The trees very often survive. It doesn't spread as far. And doing this to the backlog of choked forests that we have across the country ultimately will be a lot cheaper than the process of trying to put the fires out after they started. There's another axiom which Matthijs and I put it forward in our book, which is don't build in the wrong place, do build in the right place. For new construction or major renovation, we have had very relaxed laws about where you can build in this country. And people have kept on building on barrier beaches. They've kept on building in what's called the wildland urban interface, or WUI, which is, in other words, you're building in the woods or next to the woods. And the number of people who are at risk from this has been going up every year. At the same time that the forest fire risk has been going up also, and the grass fire risk. So there has to be some kind of method of managing where people build, so that if they do build in the wildland urban interface, as it's technically referred to, there's a big fire break between the houses and the wildland so that the forest fire can't cross it. And these are all things, there's actually, we are not the only people worried about these issues, and there is money in the infrastructure bill for doing that. It's nowhere near enough, and it's based on the communities that are smart enough to ask for the money as being the ones that get it. But it's a beginning. And as we were saying at the beginning of this discussion, when you add up the money that you have to pay out to build coastal protections or to help keep people safer from wildfire, it's a lot less than the cost of rebuilding after a disaster, either from a wildfire or from a flood.
And if you plan with these measures now and sort of include them in your normal investment cycles, your capital cycles, it is only a little bit extra rather than a whole lot extra at a later time. In addition to, of course, a smart or wise land use decision, it is important to start thinking about climate in every investment that you make. And so in many ways, you would hope that people who do build a house will be like your architecture school professor, who say, okay, how can I, at the scale of my house, manage water as well as I can? And that could be that there are a couple of things that are, and we describe those in the books, like a rain barrel, that are relatively easy and cheap, do them anyway. There's other things which might have a bit longer time to have a return on investment. But please do try to look at it, because once you take everything, or once you take the climate crisis into account in your investment decisions, you'll make better decisions for the long run.
Let me ask both of you, what was the most important design decision we can do in urban planning that you discovered while researching and writing this book?
Well, unfortunately, it's also the most important political decision, and it's very, very scary, and nobody in politics wants to address it, which is that you can, in coastal flooding, you can build protections where there are a lot of people living. And there are lots of areas where it's not cost effective to build coastal protections, or there are isolated people living in forests, and it's just going to become impossible to protect them. And some people are going to have to move. And so, how do we stop this from just being a disaster where people are climate refugees and they are forced out of their houses and they don't know where to go? And if you look at it as a national issue, there are a lot of places in this country where people have been moving away. And some of these places are actually places which will benefit to some degree from climate change. I mean, everybody is going to have problems, but many of the northern cities, which were industrial cities where people have been leaving, are going to have a better climate in the future. And there are many small communities across the country which are not at tremendous risk for climate threats. and they have been losing population. There needs to be a positive way of looking at the fact that people all across the country are going to have to make decisions about their future, which involve moving. And no politician wants to talk about this. It's not actually easy even to give a lecture and talk about this, but it's an opportunity. And that's one of the things we try to do at the end of our book, is to say, if you're going to invest all the money that you're going to need to invest to adapt to climate change and try to make, you can also use it to make life better. You can look at it, as I've just been saying, at a national scale, where you can try to help communities which need more population to get it, and to get people to face up to the fact that their house is not going to get any drier in 10 years. And at the same time, you can look at neighborhoods, and you can build into neighborhoods flood protections and ventilation and water supply, and something we also talk about in our book, which is growing food in greenhouses. You can add all of these things into neighborhoods. You can actually use the investments and changes we have to make to adapt to climate change to make life better for everybody. It's an idealistic position, but it's a realistic one.
But I think before even talking about climate migration and these other solutions, and I think, Jonathan, you're absolutely right, those are really, really critical. We have to also realize that we are still building in areas that are at risk. Jonathan gave the example of the wildlife urban interface, but there are also coastal areas that will flood in the future, or floodplains of rivers. And so one of the things that we also really need to do is to stop building in areas that are at risk or that will be at risk in the future. As we explained earlier, the climate crisis is dynamic. It brings change. Sea levels are rising, temperatures are rising, and so that means that areas that seem now pretty safe or not at risk might be at risk in the future. And understanding what those areas are and not investing in those areas, or investing only the necessary things for the people that are there now, but creating a plan for transition into areas that are maybe given back to nature, is, I think, really, really important. And we're still putting way too much at risk, and we are continuing to do that. That we don't factor in the climate in our decisions about where and how to build.
That's true. And I have spoken to, you brought a good point, people moving. There are people who are thinking about this, and I know people who have moved out of Florida. And, we were talking about wildfires, and we always associate it, yeah, with the West Coast. Well, you are where you're at, Matisse, right now. But even behind my house here in Florida, I had a wildfire, and it just took me by surprise. And I got to answer the question, "What would you grab at a fire?" I knew. I went in and grabbed my cats, my flute, and my hard drives. Thank goodness it didn't get to my house, but it was close call, and that's definitely. I hate for people to get to the close call point that you go, "I have to take action." I think we're at that point, aren't we?
Well, it's very interesting that you brought that up, because in our book we publish a map of what's called the wildland urban interface, and there's much more of it in the east than in the west, and in New England and even Minnesota and places like that, and in the southwest and southeast rather, in Florida and Georgia. And it's not a problem yet for most people, but if you have a woodland near your house 20 or 30 years ago from now, it could also be a danger. The eastern part of the United States is going to get wetter, while the western part of the United States gets drier. So I don't want to say that anybody who lives next to a forest is going to be in danger if they're in the eastern part of the United States, but it's an issue. People should look at that. And as Matthijs was saying, when you are trying to decide where to zone in your community for let people build new development, wildland-urban interface is something to look at.
But I think, Tricia, you're saying so we're at that point, and I think there are many areas in the country where we are past that point, where we have seen major climate disasters happening already, and there are other places where not so much is being seen, but where climate risks are increasing, and that's pretty much the entire country. And that's one of the reasons that we wrote the book the way we wrote it. We wanted to show that this is not just about a number of isolated places along the eastern seaboard for coastal flooding and the west for droughts and wildfires. This climate crisis is going to impact us all, and it's going to impact us in very different ways, in often ways that are relatively unpredictable, but it's going to impact us, and we need to start planning for it. But when we start planning for it, we also want to show in the book that we can create these benefits, and that actually when we start planning, we can create better towns and better cities and better natural areas that would really support not only us living safer, but also healthier, have recreational benefits, and maybe even have a stronger sense of social connection.
I think that's a good place to end it on. And we can take some action today, and we can start to have a better planet in the future again if we take some actions now, just some small actions that can lead to bigger changes.
Yes.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you here on Sunday morning. My cup of green tea is at the bottom, and I want to tell the audience this is a great book. It's also hopeful too, and I want to let people know that these are really good ideas and suggestions that you can take right now today and go to your city council and your county commissioners and say we need to take action now.
Well,
I
yes.
think so, but and not only to your politicians, also to your neighbors. And so, one of the exciting projects that we are working on at this moment is neighborhood resilience planning in the city of Houston, Texas. And there, what we're trying to do is work with people in the neighborhood, local churches, local social organizations, and try to think through what can we do together to be prepared for disasters, but also to make our neighborhoods a better place, improve the drainage, improve the waste collection, make sure that we have places to cool, etc. And so I think it's really all these levels from the let's say the block, the neighborhoods, to the local political level, to the federal level that are going to be important, and it's important to work on all those levels.
Jonathan, what projects are you working on now?
I don't want to change the subject from climate change, but I am looking at another big issue, which is what are called autonomous vehicles, that is, cars without drivers. They are being pushed very hard now by manufacturers of vehicles and by the people who write the computer programs for these, because they see a market, which is all the people who do deliveries and drive cabs and other ride services. If you can drive trucks, if you can get rid of the driver, you can make a lot more money. This is not a great motive for making a change, but there are 10 or 12 states now where driverless delivery vehicles on sidewalks and driverless ride services on highways and cars, and even driverless interstate trucks are being tested. So this is another example of an urban design issue, because which is going to change the way everything is being done in towns and cities. Because at the same time that these driverless vehicles are being promoted, many cities are trying to do what they call Vision Zero, where you try to reduce traffic fatalities to zero. And at the same time that that's happening, you're suddenly changing the way all the roads and sidewalks and bike paths are being used by these new vehicles, which are supposedly technically perfect, but which have a lot of, which are demonstrating they have a lot of problems. So that's an area of research that I'm looking into right now. However, I don't want to distract people from managing the climate crisis, which I think is a truly important issue, and I think is being missed by people because I think that everybody is still focused on trying to solve the very important, totally necessary problem of trying to get rid of additional pollutants in the air to reduce the greenhouse effect so we don't have, by mid-century, a situation which has become unmanageable. So that is a high priority. But what we are writing about in our book, Managing the Climate Crisis, is what can you do now? What do we have to do now? And what can we do to make the changes we're making make our lives improve? So I don't want to distract from that by talking about driverless cars, but that's going to be another big issue.
Thank you so much again, gentlemen. This is a great book, and I want to tell the audience, since we're talking and they can't see it, that you've got lots of great diagrams in here because obviously you're architecture trained. We do diagrams. You've got lots of great photos in here and some real practical advice. It's a very easy to read, well-researched book. And I want to thank you guys for being here. I'm going to tell the audience one more time about the book. It is Managing the Climate Crisis, Designing and Building for Floods, Heat, Drought, and Wildfire by Jonathan Barnett and Matthijs Bouw, published by Island Press in 2022. And my last sip of tea is gone. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you. We appreciate talking with you.
Have a lovely day.
You too, and a lovely Sunday morning to all of you out there in our audience. And we'll see you next week.